The problem was that I had married the wrong person, that this person was not meeting my needs.
And I was really disillusioned with it, and I got tired of it.
I actually saw him in a restaurant with other women.
We started having arguments, and we started having things, objects thrown.
And so the first year was kind of like that, things continually getting worse, and then finally that I gave up on the marriage and I gave up on God, and so did all the things that were associated with that attitude.
I was working, had a great job, making lots of money, and I really, I was getting to the point where I didn't need him either.
Has your marriage reached a crisis? Does it seem like the only answer is to separate or divorce? Hello, I'm Steve Grissom. Our purpose with this video and the related workbook is to help you make the decision whether to divorce or stay together. Now, this is not a counseling program. You won't go through exercises on how to communicate better or how to understand your mate. Instead, we want to provide you with facts and information you need to make the right choice. You face one of the biggest decisions of your life. We'll help you learn what to expect if you do divorce and the ways that decision will impact your future. Our hope is that you'll invest just a little time before making your decision. You'll gain valuable information to make a choice that will shape the rest of your life. Throughout these videos, you'll hear from top experts on topics related to separation and divorce. You'll see divorce from the eyes of people who have been where you are right now, people who have lived through and survived divorce. You'll also meet 3 couples who were able to pull their marriages back together after facing what seemed like unsolvable problems. We want to begin by looking at how you will make your final decision and some factors that will influence it. Turn to Section 1 in your Choosing Wisely workbook. You'll find a section to take notes on this and the remaining video sessions. A very important thing to remember is that divorce is your decision. No one else can make it. In the emotional upheaval that leads to divorce, you may find there are many people trying to influence your decision, that the process almost takes a life of its own. Well-meaning people may attempt to get you to go one direction or another. Friends and family can be a very good source of comfort, support, and advice, but it's also important to remember that you must make the final decision.
Different friends, family members have come across with the words of wisdom, well, you really need to get on with your life.
And family, friends, church, everybody pushes the whole divorce issue.
It's important not to be pushed into divorce without consciously knowing what's going on. And the way this will come up is that people who are well-meaning will come, perhaps family members or friends, saying, look, I don't know how you put up with him in the marriage. He's doing this and he's doing that. Why don't you just divorce the guy? You could do a lot better with someone else. And you may find yourself being pushed, being tempted to go into divorce.
If you have consulted a lawyer, it's also likely that he or she will have some very specific advice. Remember that only you will have enough information to actually make the decision.
One big mistake that couples often make when they find themselves in trouble in their marriage or facing separation or divorce is to each spouse, to run to an attorney. And the problem that arises with doing that is the attorneys tend to put themselves between the spouses and shut down communication. And that's the worst thing that can happen when you're going through a traumatic time, a crisis in your marriage. It's a time you really need to communicate with each other. But attorneys want to limit that because they're afraid that you'll give away the store, or you may agree to things that will come back and haunt you that you may regret later on, something that may affect your property rights, something that may affect the custody of the children, and they want to shut it down.
The next thing to remember is that divorce is a major decision, one that will impact many areas of your life, including financial, emotional, physical, and spiritual.
Divorce is the most painful thing you can, slide a human being through in the process of all of our living experiences, because it impacts so much of our lives.
All my life was just totally torn apart. There wasn't an aspect of my life that I knew I could depend on, that I could rely on, or could give me any peace.
I had to take a medical leave from work. I couldn't even do my job. And it just seemed like every aspect of my life was falling apart.
Another thing to keep in mind about the decision to divorce, no matter how bad things are now or what you've been through, no matter whether you are initiating the divorce or on the receiving end of one you don't want, it's a painful experience.
Any breaking of that relationship tears those bonds. You never separate after bonding. You tear after bonding. And this is important. People say, well, my husband and I separated. That's not true. You tore. And that's where the hurt is. You actually tear, and parts of you go with the other person. And that's why breaking a relationship is so difficult, because you lose a part of yourself forever.
And once the soul is hurt that bad, it's very hard to. It's worse than death, because death is a permanent thing, but divorce and separation are not permanent. They're in a situation where it's a constant wound that takes a very long time to heal.
Because no one really knew that I talked to. They couldn't relate to this deep soul level pain. We talked about emotional pain and the physical pain, but there was a spiritual pain I was feeling that no one was relating to.
When anybody separates or divorces, it's like the shattering of dreams. The hopes that they had that this was going to be lifelong are no longer there, and there's a tremendous amount of pain. And part of the pain, I think, is due to the fear of the unknown. What is going to happen? And there's so many loose ends, plus you're out of control in a sense.
One last thing to keep in mind about the decision to divorce: despite what you may hear, there is no such thing as a friendly divorce or a civilized divorce.
There's a lot of truth to that, because there's so many conflicts that are going on between the lawyers in the court, between the spouses. It's just a mass of conflict.
Let's turn our attention now to some specific areas that you'll need to explore as you make your decision. A key area, one that will require a lot of your time and attention, is the legal side of divorce. Warren Niskern is an attorney who's been through divorce himself. He's written about that experience in a book entitled When the Vow Breaks. He advises you to be very cautious about deciding when to consult an attorney. Retaining an attorney might be counterproductive when there's still some hope for keeping the marriage together.
When a marriage is in trouble, of course, the whole relationship starts to change the first time the spouse mentions the D word, divorce. But that is not necessarily the best time to run to a lawyer. That what you would be better off considering doing is to go to a counselor as soon as possible when you see that there is a problem. Counseling function is the most critical need at this point, rather than going to a lawyer. The other thing to keep in mind is that when legal issues start coming up, for example, if you see that there is a need to separate after getting counseling, and you do need legal advice, do get a lawyer, but don't let the lawyer get in between the two spouses and shut down communication, as we lawyers love to do, because we want to take control of our clients' cases.
If you do hire an attorney and end up in court, it could take a long time to resolve issues such as property division, child support, and custody. How long depends on where you live and the complexity of your situation, but many courts face a major backlog.
You would wait all day long for 3 days straight, and you would still be fifth in line. And it depends on how long the case before you takes. So we were talking a good 3 weeks, and then it would be postponed. They would reschedule, and then you'd go again ready to testify. And once again, you'd sit there, even though your lawyer would say, well, we should be heard. You would sit there all day long, just shaking.
Even if you want to go through the courts and get the divorce process quickly, in many metropolitan areas, there's a backlog of cases. So even if everyone cooperates, you can't get a hearing or a trial date if it goes to trial for a year or two sometimes. In my case, it was almost 2 years.
And then, even though you may have actually had a legal document in place, if it is not adhered to, then you have to go back to court. So it can be ongoing.
Now here's another factor to consider. It can be very expensive to litigate a divorce case. Both you and your spouse will have to pay for attorneys out of family assets, and it's hard to keep the legal expenses under control.
Everything's at risk when you hire a lawyer, but especially when you go into litigation. The only way you can really know how much it's going to cost you is if you settle. If you push a matter into court, if there's animosity, of contention and conflict between the spouses or even between the lawyers, many times the lawyers can really run up the cost just simply by fussing and feuding with themselves, like two cats in a bag. There are a lot of ways you can lose control of the litigation. Now, in terms of cost, it can vary anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. It can go up to millions.
Let's look now at the nature of the divorce process itself. If you and your spouse go to court, it becomes an adversarial process. Warren Niskern describes it as war.
Divorce litigation is war. You are going to war against your spouse, whether you like it or not.
In every war, there are warriors. In the case of divorce, the warriors are the husband and wife.
When I was served papers on New Year's Eve at like 11 o'clock at night by a sheriff. You know, and when you see somebody in a uniform standing at your door in the dark of night that late, you're scared to death that somebody in your family has been hurt or something wrong has happened. You know, I was just thankful that my children were there with me, but you know, my children don't understand why there's a policeman standing at our door, why he's coming inside and handing me papers, and why mommy is white as a sheet and doesn't know what's going on.
The husband and wife who used to love each other have now become enemies in many cases. What once was you and me against the world is now becoming you against me.
And it was about winning instead of what is right for these children, what is best, and what does God say is right.
The battlefield for this war, the divorce war, is your own home.
You've got a hurricane right in your home. And worse than that, the courts, it's almost like they lift the roof off your house to look inside. And everything that was special and intimate in your relationship and with your family is opened up to public scrutiny. There's no privacy anymore.
We got into court, and again, in front of everybody who wanted to be sitting in the courtroom at that time. If you want to go and just sit and watch a courtroom episode, anybody can walk in. So all the details that they're asking you about, you know, how was your marriage, how were you treated, what happened, why are you here, you know, things that were said, very specific things, down to, you know, how much do you make, what do you do with that money, how have you spent your time. Everything is public knowledge.
Every war has its spoils, and divorce is no exception.
Everything that you have and everything that you own is on the line. You stand to lose everything, including the custody of your kids.
Niskern goes on to say that it's very unlikely that either party will feel good about the results of divorce litigation.
In most cases, both parties feel like they've lost in some ways, either in terms of finances, in terms of just the emotional turmoil they've gone through, the havoc it played on the family and the children. It's a Pyrrhic victory in every way because everyone loses.
Even at the same time as I am feeling gut-wrenched and pulled apart, when we left, you know, my attorney was smiling because it was like, well, you did great, you know, and you don't feel great when you're doing things like that.
Here I am thinking I had achieved a victory, and actually I had really took one step further to defeat. So after the whole thing had transpired, I really felt really bad about it. I felt like I had really betrayed someone, and that little elation that I felt in the courtroom quickly left, and I felt really alone. I said, well, it was just a feeling of being alone, and like I had lost my best friend. It wasn't a very good feeling at all. And after I got back in my room and started thinking about that, I said, this just, it's not right. I don't even feel right, you know. I feel like I'm just floating in an abyss.
One key problem with divorce litigation is that you are allowing people who don't know you to make important decisions about your future.
The only certainty about litigation is that the unexpected will happen. You are gambling, you're rolling the dice when you go into court. You lose control because you're putting your life and your property and your relationships in the hands of strangers who are dispassionate and will not care as much about your feelings and what you desire, your dreams in life.
Let's take a closer look at the adversarial atmosphere that accompanies divorce litigation. One of the strategies lawyers often use is to put a lot of pressure on your spouse. Even if you are not getting along well right now, this pressure might go beyond what you would like to see.
There are a lot of legal maneuvers that take place that are nothing more than to tear the opponent down and to wear them down. My ex's attorney, I think, had a very persistent and consistent mode of sending me information or things that would be disturbing on very specific dates. I got something right before Christmas. I was served papers on New Year's Eve. I received very disturbing information in the mail on my son's birthday. It seemed like every critical reason to have a celebration would be countered by something that I would find in my mailbox.
There are lots of lawyer games that come to play. For example, if one spouse wants to surprise the other spouse with a divorce, he or she may not tell their mate that the divorce is coming. But the first news of it will come with a sheriff or a process server coming with the complaint, summons and complaint. And many times lawyers can be kind of nasty about it and have the person come to the person's work, have the process server come to the person's work, or maybe on a social engagement, just for the purpose of embarrassment.
I can remember one day in particular that we were sitting on the back deck and it was a holiday weekend. And I was sitting on the deck with my children sitting with me, and all of a sudden some strange person came up on my back deck and handed me a subpoena for my children. That they were being subpoenaed also to go to court in one of the many battles.
There are various legal procedures called interrogatories, which is a list of questions to complete what's called discovery and learn of facts. Those can be very, very probing and intrusive. There are depositions where you make statements under oath and are asked to reveal some of the most important and intimate things of your life and marriage under oath, and that record is filed in a court file, many times open for public view and inspection.
I was in a 12-hour deposition. It was 2 days back to back. The first day was 8 hours. I was in a tiny little room with no windows. I mean, this is like something you'd see on a police show, where it was the attorney, the court reporter, my attorney, and myself. And I was just pounded with questions about every detail of my marriage, down to the very intimate details of our marriage.
Your attorney may also ask you to take uncomfortable steps.
My attorney had told me to get all the financial information, which he had on videotape, not on videotape, but on computer disk, and he kept it locked in his briefcase. And so one day he left his briefcase in the car, and my attorney had impressed upon me that this was so important that no matter what it took, that I needed to get this information. So when he went up to change from his suit, I ran out to the car and took the briefcase and jumped over a 6-foot fence and went flying down a very steep driveway and skinned my knee, I think, to the 2nd degree. And ran to my neighbor's house and got a kitchen knife and pried open the briefcase, and was going through the information when he knocked on the door and demanded that I come out and give him his briefcase, at which time we opened the patio sliding door and threw all the paperwork underneath a lounge chair and went to the door and handed him an empty briefcase. At which time he went home and called the police, and they came over, and my friend's husband was scared, so they ended up giving him all the information back.
An aggressive attorney representing you may also conflict with your spouse's attorney, creating even more problems.
Well, the traps are it can be very expensive because when the lawyers start going at it, what you have is a storm within a storm. Conflict breeds more conflict. Like I said, two attorneys going at it is like two cats in a bag. It's a fight that just won't quit.
Niskern says the best strategy is to keep your marriage together. If that's not possible, avoid litigation at all costs and attempt to work out the details of the divorce directly with your spouse or through mediation.
Divorce litigation is a lot like chemotherapy. First of all, you use it only as a last resort. Secondly, you may feel a whole lot worse with no guarantee that you'll ever get better. And thirdly, you may lose your hair in the process.
If you do proceed with a divorce, whether you negotiate or go to court, there are several things that have to be decided. One important and often controversial topic is the division of the things you own, often called a property settlement. If the court divides your property, most typically it will attempt to make a 50-50 split. There are, however, exceptions.
The judges are supposed to start with a 50-50 split, and then they start making allocations. For example, if one spouse owned a house before the marriage and it was brought in, that's considered non-marital property. But he may have sold that house during the marriage and they may have bought another house. So then you start mixing funds together and it's very hard to trace it and find out who owned what, and then you got to figure interest, various other aspects like that. Then you've got gifts coming from other family members, perhaps an inheritance. And a lot of things, some of which are exempt, by the way, a lot of things are coming into the mix. So the judges start allocating all these things, and what you end up with at the end is many times not 50-50.
If you owe money, the court will most likely assign 50% of the debt to each spouse as well.
Well, if there are debts incurred while the marriage is going on, it's a joint marital debt. But then again, you have muddy waters because one spouse may be secretly running up a debt on a credit card by courting a mistress, for example. There are tax liabilities. When you sign a tax return, a husband and wife sign a tax return, they're both saying that what is there is accurate. But if the husband has been hiding income or doing some things that are illegal, the wife is going to be equally responsible for that. So there's a morass of problems that have to be sorted out. But generally, debts that are incurred by both spouses during the marriage are going to be allocated 50-50.
Another area that will be examined during a divorce proceeding is the question of alimony, or spouse support, as it is more frequently called now. If one spouse has not worked outside the home during the marriage, temporary or permanent support may be awarded to that spouse.
Typically, women are the ones that have received spouse support to compensate them for the fact that they have not been in the working world and may not be able to get out into the working world when they're on their own, especially when they have to take care of children, to kind of balance things out after the property has been split.
If you have children, there are two important issues to resolve. The first, who will get custody of the children? Statistically, custody of the children is granted to the mother in about 70% of the cases. And if the parents can't agree among themselves who will get the kids, the court will make that decision for them.
Well, if the spouses can't agree on custody, it's almost for sure that a stranger is going to decide that. And probably it's going to be a judge based upon recommendations from maybe a child psychologist, someone who's done some investigation into the situation. But what a tragedy. The parents are the ones that should resolve that between themselves.
So it's been extremely hard to watch these three little precious children be put in the middle once again, through the court system even, with one time with a judge that was not understanding or sympathetic, another time with a judge that was a little more compassionate, but for someone else to make these decisions for you is extremely hard. That someone else is deciding where your children are going to live.
Don't put your life and property and relationships, your family, into the hands of a stranger who really doesn't care about your feelings. They just want to administer justice as quickly as possible.
Another important issue is child support. Both parents are expected to contribute to the support of their children. Typically, the non-custodial parent pays a monthly support amount to the custodial parent to help with the expenses associated with the children. Most states have standard formulas to determine what that monthly amount will be and are getting tough on parents who do not pay.
There is going to be more and more pressure to go after the spouses that have child support obligations and are not fulfilling those obligations through income deduction orders and wage assignments. They're going to start denying them getting licenses, driver's licenses, to force them to come in to compliance with their obligations. And in Florida, they have gone so far as just doing statewide sweeps, picking up people who are not paying child support and throwing them in jail until they either pay up or charge it to their credit card or have some other means of paying the obligations. The states are getting fed up with people that are just ignoring their obligations. And even more than that, as Christians, the Bible says that a man who does not take care of his family is worse than an unbeliever. This is a very serious matter before God, aside from whatever the state says.
Child support typically continues until age 18 and sometimes continues through college. Some parents are surprised to learn that even if they remarry and gain responsibility for children or stepchildren in their new marriage, they are still responsible for support payments.
Like anything else, before you make a decision, you count the cost and you consider the consequences. And in most cases, when you remarry and take on additional dependents, you're going to have to cover that in addition to your prior obligations.
There's one final thought about the legal process we'd like you to consider. Some of you watching this tape are Christians, followers of Christ. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 7, that Christians are not to take other Christians to court. Instead, conflicts are to be resolved by the church.
Well, you know, it's really amazing how some people can read 1 Corinthians 6, verses 1 through 8, where Paul is so strong in saying that Christians should not go to law against their brothers, and just think that that doesn't apply to divorce. But divorce is going to law against your spouse. And I think 1 Corinthians 6 definitely does apply to a divorce situation, which is why I think it's very appropriate and necessary to go through church mediation privately among Christians, because when you go to court, it's inevitable that there are going to be things that will come out that will not only hurt the people, the parties involved, but disparage the cause of Christ if people know that they're Christians. And I know in my divorce, the lawyers who were not Christians were very much aware that my wife and I were Christians. And it is something that the world notices.
I had gone down to the courthouse on 2 occasions, and I had stood in line at the Clerk of Superior Court's office to get the papers the necessary papers to file for divorce. So the first time I stood in line, I got up right next to I had to wait in line for 10, 15 minutes, and I got right beside the counter, and I turned and walked away. And a month or 2 passed, and I decided, well, I'm going to go do it again. And at this time, if I cannot do it, if I stand in that line and I can't do it, even though my faith wasn't strong, I thought to myself, if I can't do it, God or somebody up there must be telling me that I don't want you to do this. So once again, I stood in the line, and I was next in line to get my papers, and I turned and walked away. And at that point in time was when I got back and I called Juana, and I said, honey, I think I want to try to work this out. I'm so tired of trying to deny it and make up excuses. I want to give it another shot.
Let's turn our attention now to some additional financial issues you should consider. If you are planning to separate or divorce, you need to plan on a doubling of your expenses in many areas. You will now have 2 separate households to support, each of which could consume up to 40% of your net spendable income.
When I was living at the Y and whatever, I was still working, but I had the money then that I was making, I was using to pay, you know, at the Y where I was staying. So that was taking money away from the home, and you know, it wasn't the most important thing in my mind, but in the back of my mind, I was saying, well, am I going to live in a room for the rest of my life? I mean, you know, where is this going to take me financially?
In the average income family, a home can consume about 40% of what I call net spendable income. After you pay your taxes, after you pay your tithes, what you have left over is net spendable. About 40% of that can go into a home, and that includes everything. That includes payments, utilities, insurance, everything that would go into the home, including telephone bills.
You know, after a while, about being apart and thinking about that, that was like a double setback, and it was a double something to have on your mind. It's the, you know, where I'm going to live at the Y, and so yeah, you know, I couldn't see it then, but it was really, it was crushing the marriage, and I couldn't see it.
Let's say that it takes 60% of your income to buy a home or to rent a home, whatever you're going to do. There will not be enough money. The other 40% won't stretch far enough to cover all the other categories. Housing is the biggest expense most divorcees face.
It's such a snowball effect, everything you have to do. We had to sell our home. Here's the home I had, one of my children had been born in. I had been for 5 years. And first there's a trauma of losing the relationship. Compound that on here I am with all of my wonderful friends, moving my furniture out of my home, looking around going, what happened? This was my home. So all of the security you had is gone now. There is a sense of security when you walk into your home, and this is home. This is home. At least I've got home. Well, home's now gone. You need to find a place to live that you can rent, that you and 3 children can live in, that you feel safe in as a single mother with 3 children.
The additional expenses of separation and divorce are often overlooked in the emotional turmoil.
The most important issue was our behavior, the way we were acting. I don't even think we looked at the consequences of the finance at that time. It might have been somewhere in the background, but we were more, the issue was more or less the way our behavior, I think, was a little more of an important issue.
So it's devastating, the finance, because you don't think about that. Just like you said, when you're going through that, you just see, or you just feel hurt and you feel pain, and sometimes you just want to get out of it.
You'll probably have to make some cuts and sacrifices to stabilize financially.
And now I needed to start learning how to pay bills and to live on a budget. I'd never done this before. Sat down with my father. He helped me write it all out on paper. How does it look? You need to quit subscribing to these magazines. You need to stop this. You need to stop that. You need to cut back here. You need to give this up. You need to stop this. All these things I needed to change to work my life around this new set financial amount that I was getting, which looked on paper like a lot of money, but it doesn't always come out that way.
I would say the first thing you have to do, develop a crisis budget immediately. That means take a realistic view of what you're going to be able to make post-divorce and adapt to that standard of living right now. If that means you've got to sell the home, put it up for sale. It means you've got to sell the car, put it up for sale. Don't wait until this thing is totally finalized, meaning that you're out on your own, to start making those adjustments, because you won't have the cash flow at that point to be able to make those adjustments normally.
It's even possible that there will not be enough money to make ends meet and that one or both of you ends up in bankruptcy.
That was a devastating reality for me. I had to claim bankruptcy. And that, to me, was just as painful as the divorce itself, even more painful, because I prided myself on, I was the type of person that I paid my bills as soon as I got them, and for 10 years, that's how it was. But being on my own, having 2 separate households, it was just something that I had to do.
If you have children and one spouse, typically the wife, has been at home caring for them, you may be in for a shock when she looks for work to help meet the new expenses of maintaining 2 households.
2 things. Number one, that we aren't the same economy that we were 20 years ago. There aren't the numbers of jobs that were out there, that are out there now that were out there 20 years ago. So you're going to find a lot more job resistance. Second, you're going to be real shocked at how low the starting wages are. Typically, if you've been out of the workplace for 10 years or longer, you're probably talking about starting a job at about $5 per hour.
I'm going to be a working mom again. I'm going to be a breadwinner. And I've been at home with my children for quite a few years now. So I was fortunate enough to be able to stay at home. But now I'm having to pay the consequences for that because that's not recognized really in the job force. And I'm having to start all over again.
When he took himself and his finances from the home, it left me ultimately having to go out and find work. And it caused us basically to have to move.
As a result of these conditions, it's not unusual for a single parent to live on substantially less than they were accustomed to during their marriage.
Typical divorcee in America today makes about 1/3 of what the average income family or median income family makes.
As a single mother in this day and age, I am living paycheck to paycheck.
And single parents, in my opinion, are the neediest group of people outside of the elderly that I have ever counseled in America.
As you can see, divorce is a serious decision with lots of consequences. In our next session, we'll take a look at how divorce can affect you emotionally, how it can impact your physical health, and its effect on your spiritual life. Between now and the next time we get together, you'll find some helpful resources in your workbook, including a list of books if you would like to find additional information on some of the topics we've examined today, and a section entitled On Your Own, designed to help you focus on the essential elements of the decision ahead of you. You'll find it very helpful to spend a few minutes with this section each day. As we go, we'd like you to consider making a commitment to yourself and your spouse that you will not take any further steps towards separation or divorce until you have completed this material. After you've viewed the remaining videos, you'll have a lot more information to help you make your final decision. There's a page in your workbook that gives you some suggestions on making this commitment. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.